Welcome to this instalment of the New Society for the Environment Policy Leaders interview series. Today it's a pleasure to introduce Martin Baxter, and today we'll be discussing the value of policy making and hopefully giving some interesting insights into the policy making process and the everyday successes and challenges associated with it. Hi, Martin.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to participate in this. Really looking forward to it.
Thank you for being here, Martin. So could you please give us an introduction into your role?
Yeah, so I'm Policy and External Affairs Director and Deputy Chief Exec at IEMA. So I lead a lot of our work with governments and regulators and also businesses externally as well. As part of my role, I'm also chair of a group with the International Standards Organization on developing international standards on environment, which is interesting. I think I have about 100 countries in my committee, which is an interesting meeting to chair. But also in my role as well, it's kind of quite cross-cutting across IEMA, and I lead on finance for IEMA as well. So kind of quite an unusual mix of responsibilities and accountabilities.
Yeah, it's interesting. The higher up you get into an organization, the more the oversight of the different aspects of the organization interlink. And it's just interesting to see how that carries into policy as well. So what do you find most interesting about your role?
I think there are two things I would highlight. One is just the variety. So the breadth of topic areas that I get involved in is incredibly wide. So it can be anything from green jobs and skills, which is a big area for us at the moment, but also it can be around climate change mitigation and adaptation, it can be around biodiversity and natural environment, natural capital. It can also stretch into modern slavery and sometimes into kind of human rights related issues as well. So that breadth is is really interesting and exciting. I think the other thing as well, though, is I'm really fortunate in my role and in the work that we do is the opportunity to catalyze change at scale. And so be able to, through the work that we do and the ideas that we put forward, can make change for a positive future that affects lots and lots of people and or organizations. So that's really satisfying as well.
That's so interesting. And, recently we had on the podcast someone who was working in sustainability, but within the defense sector. So like you said, it's just so interesting to hear about how sustainability and environmental management feeds into all these different areas that most people who are just starting out on their careers, or even that are in the middle of their careers, would never think initially would be related.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing for me is that IEMA members are in all sectors of the economy. So whether that's financial services, retail, infrastructure, utilities like water and power, football clubs. So it's just it's fascinating. And we have members in 115 countries around the world. So the international dimension as well is also really important. So those are things that I'm able to tap into and draw on when we're working on policy development and also implementation of policy as well, because I think there's lots of good words written in policy documents, but unless they're actually kind of implemented and delivered, then it's been a bit of a waste of time. So that's another part of what we really focus on as well.
Yes, I think that's one of the things that I find most interesting about policy is the difference between policy in theory and policy in practice. And I'm particularly interested to learn a bit more about your international influence, actually. Do you think you could give us some insights into this?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm really fortunate that I'm head of delegation for the UK to the International Standards Organization on Environmental Management Standardization. And I also chair one of the key committees that's responsible for one of the most widely used standards around. So the ISO 14001 Environmental Management System standard is used by over 500,000 organizations in every country around the world. And when the last big revision was kind of going through and being negotiated, I was leading for the UK, and some of the content and ideas that appear in that global standard are directly as a result of the work that we were able to contribute from speaking to IEMA members far and wide, and putting that into that standard, and therefore being able to drive change. So to be able to affect the way in which 500,000 and more organisations deal with environment in terms of their operational frameworks and delivery frameworks is it's really heartening. So that's an example.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I think I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was all about how people should choose a career to go into. And the main takeaway from it was that you should pursue a career that's not just financially rewarding, but is also valuable, that you feel is valuable, that others see as valuable. So I think that must be the best feeling, that you actually drive change. Thank you. And what do you think, or how would you describe a normal week in your role?
Well, I think, what is a normal week? I think, there are certain things that always tend to come up. So, there'll be various announcements from different parts of either government or standards, and keeping up to date on those, potentially writing content for media releases around those is really important. Lots of meetings with stakeholders, whether that's the government. So I'm involved in initiatives with different government departments, so not just the Department for Environment and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, but also we're connected in with the Department for Education and Skills, the Department of Work and Pensions, on employment-related issues, also the likes of Ministry of Defence and others. So understanding what's driving the agenda and where IEMA can make a contribution, or where our members need to be aware of things in order to do their jobs effectively, is really important. So there's a lot of that involvement for me in my role. We also have a team of people in IEMA, so catching up with them on various aspects of their work programs. My colleague, who's Ben Goodwin, head of policy, is kind of leading on that. So those are things that are important. The other one, though, is then connecting all of this across IEMA. So what does this mean for membership and professional standards teams? What might this mean for our training and learning and development team? What might it mean for the work that we do with our corporate partners on workforce transformation? So I do spend quite a bit of time out of my home office, either in London, in meetings with different bits of government, or speaking to, presenting in conferences and various things, but also meeting boards of companies as well, helping them to understand what the expectations are in terms of delivering on national commitments to a cleaner, greener future. So it's a blend of lots of things, and then keeping an eye on the finances as well, and potentially writing papers for our board, etc. on income.
Yeah, I mean, listening to that, it's crazy the amount of collaboration and knowledge sharing that must have to go on for that to happen. I mean, I can see in the background the IEMA mission transforming the world to sustainability, and the amount of skills that are involved with all of that cooperation across all those departments for all of those goals it's really impressive, and it's also exciting because of the potential that is going to come out of that. So it's nice to hear.
And it's really good as well because our work colleagues are also really enthusiastic and driven by our mission. So that makes it easier. They have a thirst for understanding what's happening and how they can contribute and lead things as well. So it's about giving them the space to do that, because if it all rests from one person, then you're never going to fulfill, the IEMA potential and the potential that our members can contribute into this agenda as well. So
Yes, mission is so important. So in your career so far, is there a particular example you can give that you're most proud of in policymaking?
Oh, can I be greedy and talk about 2 or 3? There's, I think, if I go back well over a decade, we did a lot of work to bring greenhouse gas emission reporting into a legal requirement for companies through a change in the Companies Act. And we did a lot of work with IEMA members. They were really supportive of this. And we did a series of road shows around the UK with policy officials being able to speak to our members, understand how they were already doing aspects of this in a voluntary capacity. But then the key thing was, how do we convince government that this should be mandated through law? And so we worked with DEFRA's economists to get the information needed to do a full cost benefit analysis on costs and benefits of reporting. So government was really, this was, when that austerity was kind of at its height and the economy was really shaky. So, government was really reluctant to put additional costs onto business. And what we were able to demonstrate through the work that we did with the economists and our members was that over a period of time, then the cost benefit of reporting was actually positive for firms. And so that paved the way for, at the time it was Nick Clegg, was Deputy Prime Minister, to make that announcement. So that was one that, we really did a lot of detailed work with officials, met with ministers, and got that over the line. More recently, spent a lot of time on the Environment Act and looking at how we could shape that. So IEMA was, home to what's called the Broadway Initiative, and that was a collaboration across business and NGOs and professional bodies to try and get an Environment Act into a good shape. And so I did a lot of work on the governance framework under the new Act. Working with, I think I met with 4 Secretaries of State, kind of over the period of the Environment Act coming into effect, gave evidence in person before Commons and Lords committees, had a meeting with the Chancellor in Downing Street, had a meeting with, at the time it was Theresa May's advisors in Downing Street as well, to try and get a coherent Environment Act into shape. And really fortunate that the papers that we produced on the as part of this set the foundations for the legally binding targets. I sat one Sunday morning when it was raining at home in the kitchen and just drafted out that section. So the bit that says there's a duty on government to set a target in those 4 areas, which were the biodiversity, waste and resource efficiency, air quality, water, etc., that those targets should be 15 years into the future. It's a duty to ensure that targets are met. There'll be 5-year milestones, which are now in the economic improvement plan. All of that was in the paper that I put together, and it made it onto the statute book. So that's pretty good, because that sets the direction of travel in terms of not just slowing the decline of the environment, but actually getting into, restorative processes and delivery, and having kind of legal mechanisms to do that. So, that's an interesting one as well.
That's good to hear. I definitely haven't heard enough about restorative measures, and it's nice to hear about the more tangible aspects of policy as well, because I do think sometimes it can feel a bit up in the air, again, the theory of policy making rather than in practice. So thank you. That's good to hear some tangible examples. So more focusing on IEMA itself then, as a representative of IEMA's 20,000 members, how do you gather member input and represent member views to decision makers?
Yeah, it's a challenge, particularly because we have a broad membership. Not all of our members are in the UK, so we're kind of cognizant of that. But generally, their approach is that we will, we have policy. We have a policy advisory committee, which is a committee of our board. So that's a really important organisational kind of governance structure that has oversight. So that's important. And we have steering groups in thematic areas, which are groups of members who are working on different policy areas. So that can be biodiversity and natural capital, climate change and energy, impact assessment, circular economy, etc. And so members will have insights into what might need to change. We also have it ourselves because we're speaking to members in various contexts. Typically, what we will do is, if there's a particular thing we want to push, then we will use the connections that we have into different bits of government, speak to policymakers, sometimes speak to some of our other co-collaborators who might be able to leverage things as well, or where we have common issues, and then start that process of developing a position. For us, the aim is to, as much as possible, work on how we might be able to set the agenda, rather than just wait for a government consultation to be issued, and then put some workshops on for members to help to inform our response. Sometimes then on the back of that, depending on whether we have the time, because consultation periods can be incredibly short sometimes. So sometimes then we will do a survey of members as well to get additional input and insights, and then that gets written up into a consultation with members. So we have a number of different mechanisms that we use depending on the topic area that we're working on. The opportunity. Sometimes you have to work quite quickly. And so that's where, having had lots of conversations and discussions with members in our member groups, then we've got a good insight into what IEMA members, are interested in and, keen to push. And therefore, our job then is, how do you help to deliver that? But yeah, it's not easy. and I guess it's that breadth again as well. So, we can be feeding into issues relating to sustainable finance, which is very different than maybe the work that's going on at the moment on impact assessment and changes to the EIA and SEA regimes. So different groups of people who will be involved in that work and bringing together the expertise within our membership to inform where policy should go.
Yes, that's just so, there's so many factors at play there. But it's good to know that there's such a thorough process of feedback going on between the organisation and its members. So what would you say are the biggest challenges in your policy work?
I think there are a number of challenges. So one is, and I've mentioned this issue about the breadth of topic areas. So that's a challenge. I think another challenge is that policymakers change quite quickly. So I mentioned during the Environment Act, just as the Act was being developed, as the bill was being developed, and then the bill was going through Parliament and to get the bill onto the statute book, we had 4 different secretaries of state, different ministerial teams, different policy officials that we were working with during that period. So that churn of people can be a real challenge because you often have to either start again, or when you've built up what you think is an understanding, suddenly a change in personnel can be different views, different insights. So that's really hard as well. And I think it's also just understanding where the opportunities actually lie, where you can make change. And so sometimes it's really hard when, for example, maybe our members want to push something and there's absolutely no chance of it whatsoever just at that particular point in time. So being fairly pragmatic about what can be done and when it can be done is all difficult. And I think over time, what I've learned is that a lot of policy takes a long time to come to what I and others might think is patently obvious. So I've got used to that process being a lot slower than the urgency might indicate is needed from an environmental perspective. But that's the way change happens quite often, particularly in policy circles. So I think that's where it's personally quite challenging. Well, we knew that 10 years ago. It's only just now being mainstreamed across government policy, but that's how it is. If you can't cope with that, then you're possibly doing the wrong job.
Yes, I think that's something that becomes more evident the more I learn about policy is you cannot. So there's a quote that says you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want because you have to prioritize certain interests. Everything has to come at a cost. And as much as there are amazing ambitions about meeting environmental targets and having influence on government, you cannot do everything. So I find it really interesting to learn about the more personal side of policy, like you said, with building relationships with people in high politics. And I think it must just be so difficult to balance, like you said, the cross-sector aspects with the personal relationships that you need to develop, and then also prioritizing short-term, long-term. So,
yeah.
It's interesting. And then finally, last question. So IEMA are part of many different cross-sector working groups, such as the Green Jobs Delivery Group and Environmental Policy Forum. What are the benefits of working in collaboration to influence policy?
Well, I think, we recognise that we can't do everything on our own. And actually, you can quite often get better policy generally by working collaboratively as well, because you will have been able to test and develop insights and proposals that have different perspectives, and therefore you can test out how your ideas might work in a slightly different context than you might initially have been thinking. So I think for us, there are certain areas where we think that we should be leading on, and we will blaze a trail and we will invite collaborators to be part of that. And equally, we're happy that actually if the message is being led by another organisation or another group of organisations and we can add our voice to it, then that's sometimes the most effective thing as well. So being able to convene groups to drive change is really important, and also being part of collaborations and coalitions and all the rest of it is really helpful as well. So I think recognizing that is quite hard, because you have to kind of understand, again, this is all about dealing with people. I mean, we know the issues, but actually this is about relationships and dealing with people, building up that collaboration, understanding what other people's drivers might be from their memberships or their perspectives, depending on kind of who you're working with, and then thinking how can what you want to achieve and are promoting also kind of work in that concept as well. So yeah, it's definitely more effective if you can get it right, providing you don't compromise too far on the things that you're trying to drive.
Yes, like everything, it's a balance. Well, I think that's everything for today. So thank you for giving insights into the more personal aspects of policy making, as well as from your position, the specifics of your role as well. It was very interesting to hear about.
My pleasure. Thank you for chatting.
Thanks for watching. To learn more about Society for the Environment's role in policy, please visit our Knowledge Hub for the latest policy resources and submissions.